Your soulmate's family secretly talked about you. What they decided will surprise you. My beloved child, stay with this moment for just a little longer, because what you are about to hear was never meant to reach you this soon. Somewhere beyond your awareness, a conversation unfolded without your name ever being spoken loudly, yet every silence in that room seemed to point toward you. Strange, isn't it? Sometimes the decisions that shape our future begin in places we never see, among people we have never met, during ordinary moments that suddenly become unforgettable. What if today is one of those moments? Don't rush ahead. Every piece of this story fits together for a reason, and by the end of it, the title that brought you here will feel far more meaningful than it first appeared. Picture a quiet evening. Nothing dramatic. Nothing that would catch anyone's attention from the outside. Yet inside a family home, thoughts began moving in unexpected directions. Your soulmate's family found themselves returning to the same question again and again. Not because someone forced the discussion, but because your presence had quietly entered their minds through small clues, unexpected emotions, and moments that refused to be ignored. Have you ever noticed how certain names seem to carry a feeling long before they carry a story? That was the atmosphere surrounding you. No one knew exactly why. They only knew something about you felt different. One voice wondered whether destiny could really introduce two people long before circumstances allowed them to meet properly. Another believed that some connections reveal themselves through patience rather than speed. The room wasn't filled with arguments. It was filled with curiosity. Each person viewed the situation from a different angle, yet every opinion somehow circled back to the same conclusion. There was more to you than anyone had expected. Isn't it fascinating how people can sense depth without having every answer? Hold that thought, because what happened next changed the direction of their entire conversation. At first, someone expressed uncertainty. They questioned whether the timing was right. They wondered if waiting would protect everyone involved. It sounded reasonable. But then another family member quietly shared something unexpected. They described how your soulmate had been changing, not in dramatic ways, but through subtle moments that only those closest to them could notice. Their confidence had grown. Their outlook had softened. They had become more thoughtful, more hopeful, almost as if an invisible light had entered their life. No one mentioned your name directly at first, yet everyone silently understood what the change seemed to be connected to. Pause here for a second. What if people notice your influence before they ever understand its source? What if the impact you leave on someone's heart quietly reaches those around them as well? Life often works in ways that don't announce themselves immediately. Sometimes the greatest evidence isn't loud. It's found in the peaceful changes others begin to recognize. The discussion continued, becoming deeper with every passing minute. One family member admitted they had expected resistance if your story ever became part of their future. Instead, they found themselves asking a surprising question: what if we've misunderstood this from the beginning? That single thought shifted the atmosphere completely. Suddenly, they weren't searching for reasons to doubt. They were searching for reasons to understand. Every memory they shared about your soulmate pointed toward the same realization. Happiness cannot always be explained, but it can certainly be recognized. The most unexpected voice in the room belonged to someone who rarely spoke during important conversations. Everyone waited as they slowly gathered their thoughts. Instead of offering advice, they shared an observation. They said that genuine connections don't usually arrive with perfect timing. They arrive with perfect purpose. Those words settled into the room like the final piece of an unfinished puzzle. No one interrupted. No one argued. They simply reflected. Stay with this story a little longer. The turning point is closer than it appears. What seemed like an ordinary family conversation was quietly transforming into something much more significant. One by one, concerns gave way to curiosity. Curiosity slowly became acceptance. Acceptance began opening the door to possibility. They still didn't have every answer, but they no longer believed the future should be judged by fear or assumptions. Meanwhile, your soulmate remained completely unaware that this discussion had taken place. They had no idea their family had spent so much time thinking about the direction of their life. Yet somehow, they felt lighter the following day. Have you ever experienced peace without knowing where it came from? Sometimes the heart recognizes a shift long before the mind understands it. That unseen change was already beginning to move through their world. But the conversation wasn't over. Just as everyone believed they had reached a conclusion, one final thought emerged, an idea so unexpected that it brought complete silence to the room. It wasn't a rejection. It wasn't blind approval either. It was something far more surprising. Something that would eventually reshape how every person in that family viewed you. And when that decision is finally revealed, you'll understand why everything you've heard so far was only the beginning. Stay close, because the next chapter uncovers the choice that no one in that room saw coming. A quiet realization began to spread through the room, not because someone made a powerful speech, but because every person suddenly noticed the same pattern from a different perspective. Have you ever watched a puzzle come together without anyone forcing the pieces into place? That was exactly what happened. The conversation stopped feeling like a debate and started feeling like a discovery. Stay with this moment, because the next few minutes reveal why your soulmate's family could no longer ignore what they had been sensing all along. One by one, they began recalling moments that had never seemed important before. A smile that appeared whenever your soulmate drifted into deep thought. A sense of calm that replaced old frustrations. Dreams that had quietly become bigger. Even simple conversations around the dinner table carried a different energy. None of these changes happened overnight, yet together they painted a picture that was impossible to overlook. Someone finally whispered, "People don't change like this without a meaningful reason." The room fell silent again. Not an uncomfortable silence, but the kind that appears when truth quietly enters the conversation. Another family member leaned forward and shared something no one else had noticed. They admitted they had once believed your soulmate was simply going through another phase of life. But as weeks passed, they realized the transformation never faded. Instead, it became stronger. More consistent. More genuine. They described seeing hope where there had once been uncertainty. They saw confidence replacing hesitation. They saw someone beginning to believe that their future could become brighter than their past. Think about that for a moment. Sometimes the people closest to us recognize our emotional growth before we do. They witness the small victories that often go unnoticed. Those silent victories became the strongest evidence in that family discussion. Then something completely unexpected happened. The oldest voice in the room gently asked a question that no one had considered. What if we have been waiting for proof, when the proof has been in front of us all along? The words echoed through everyone's thoughts. No one rushed to answer. Because deep inside, every person already knew exactly what those words meant. The conversation shifted once more, not toward fear, but toward possibility. Instead of asking whether you belonged in your soulmate's future, they started asking what kind of future could exist if they chose to understand rather than assume. That single change in perspective altered everything. Walls that had quietly existed inside their minds began disappearing. Doubts became questions. Questions became conversations. Conversations became understanding. Stay a little longer. You're getting closer to the moment that changes everything. One family member smiled softly and confessed something almost unbelievable. They admitted they had imagined meeting you countless times in their own mind. Not because they knew who you were, but because they wanted to understand the person who had inspired such a remarkable change. They weren't searching for perfection anymore. They were searching for authenticity. That difference mattered more than anyone realized. The discussion continued late into the evening. Stories from the past were shared. Lessons learned through experience were remembered. Old misunderstandings suddenly looked smaller than they once had. Someone quietly observed that every generation carries different expectations, yet genuine character always speaks louder than appearances. That simple sentence lingered in the room longer than anyone expected. At that very moment, something invisible seemed to settle over the conversation. Not certainty. Not finality. But peace. And peace has a remarkable way of revealing the direction people should take. If this story is touching something inside you, feel free to share your thoughts in the comments. Sometimes reading another person's perspective reminds us that unexpected connections often begin with quiet moments just like this. And if stories that explore hope, destiny, and meaningful possibilities resonate with you, subscribing simply means we'll continue discovering them together. As the evening finally came to an end, everyone believed the discussion was finished. They stood up. The chairs moved. The lights began turning off. But just before everyone left the room, one person quietly said something so unexpected that every step came to a stop. It wasn't a warning. It wasn't a disagreement. It was a proposal. A single idea that no one had anticipated, an idea that would completely reshape what your soulmate's family intended to do next. And once that proposal was accepted, the future no longer looked the same. The decision they reached wasn't about choosing sides. It was about choosing understanding over assumptions. But the exact choice they made, and why it surprised even your soulmate, is still waiting to be revealed. The next chapter opens the door to that unforgettable moment. For a brief moment, it seemed as though the conversation had finally reached its end, yet the most unforgettable part had not even begun. Imagine standing at the edge of a doorway, believing you've seen everything inside, only to discover another room hidden beyond it. That was the feeling everyone in your soulmate's family experienced. They thought they had reached a conclusion, but destiny had prepared one final surprise. Stay with this story until the last sentence of this chapter, because the decision they made carried a meaning no one expected. The person who had remained the quietest throughout the evening slowly stood up. Everyone turned toward them. They rarely spoke unless they believed every word truly mattered. Instead of giving advice, they shared a memory from many years ago. They recalled a time when fear had caused their own family to misunderstand someone who later became one of the greatest blessings in their lives. "We judged too early," they admitted softly. "We looked at uncertainty instead of character." Those words settled over the room like a gentle sunrise after a long night. No one interrupted. Because every face reflected the same realization. How many opportunities disappear simply because people decide before they understand? That question changed everything. One by one, family members began nodding, not because they suddenly knew every answer, but because they understood something even more valuable. They didn't need certainty to choose kindness. They didn't need perfect knowledge to remain open-minded. Sometimes the wisest decision isn't declaring the future, it's allowing the future the chance to reveal itself. Then came the moment no one had predicted. Someone quietly suggested something that immediately captured everyone's attention. "What if," they said, "instead of forming opinions from a distance, we simply wait for the right moment to truly know this person?" The room became completely still. That wasn't the decision anyone expected. There would be no rushing. No assumptions. No invisible walls. Instead, they agreed on something surprisingly simple. If the opportunity ever came naturally, they wanted to meet you with open hearts rather than preconceived ideas. Not to judge. Not to test. But to understand. It sounded almost ordinary. Yet for that family, it was extraordinary. Because only hours earlier, the conversation had been filled with uncertainty. Now it was filled with quiet hope. Take a moment and think about that. Sometimes the greatest victory isn't winning someone's approval. It's giving people enough space to discover the truth for themselves. Without pressure. Without pretending. Without forcing anything. Meanwhile, your soulmate had absolutely no idea this decision had been made. They continued living their day, carrying the same hopes and questions as before. Yet somewhere beneath the surface, the path ahead had already shifted. Isn't life remarkable that way? Some of the biggest turning points happen while we're completely unaware they're unfolding. As the family gathered their things and prepared to leave the room, one final sentence echoed through the silence. "Let's not stand in the way of something that could become beautiful." No dramatic applause followed. No emotional speeches. Just peaceful agreement. And strangely, that quiet agreement felt more powerful than any celebration. Before you leave this chapter, remember this. Not every meaningful decision is announced with noise. Some of the most important ones are spoken gently, remembered deeply, and revealed only when the time is right. You may think this story has reached its ending. But it hasn't. Because your soulmate is about to discover that this private family conversation created a chain of events no one could have imagined. A simple message, an unexpected meeting, and one heartfelt moment will soon reveal just how far this decision reaches. The story is only becoming clearer, and what happens next will connect every clue you've heard so far in a way that feels both surprising and deeply meaningful. A new chapter quietly begins. Not with a dramatic announcement, but with a feeling that something invisible has already started moving. Have you ever sensed that life was rearranging itself behind the scenes before you could see any evidence? That is exactly where this story now leads. Everything your soulmate's family discussed has settled into a single decision, and now that decision is beginning to influence moments no one planned. Don't rush through this part. The smallest detail may become the biggest revelation. Days passed. Nothing extraordinary appeared on the surface. The world continued exactly as it always had. Yet beneath those ordinary days, attitudes had changed. Your soulmate's family no longer viewed your story through uncertainty. Instead, they began noticing every positive change with fresh eyes. They listened more carefully whenever your soulmate spoke about the future. They paid attention to the quiet happiness that had become part of everyday life. It wasn't excitement that convinced them. It was consistency. Real change doesn't appear once. It remains. That realization became impossible to ignore. One afternoon, an unexpected conversation began again, not because anyone planned it, but because your soulmate smiled while talking about a future goal. Someone in the family quietly noticed that same peaceful confidence they had discussed days earlier. "There it is again," one voice said with a gentle smile. "The same hope." No one disagreed. Instead, another family member replied, "Maybe we've been witnessing the answer this entire time." Those words carried more weight than anyone expected. The discussion no longer centered on questions about you. It centered on possibilities. Imagine hearing people speak about your future with genuine optimism without even realizing it. Sometimes life prepares hearts before it prepares circumstances. That quiet preparation became the greatest surprise of all. Then something beautifully unexpected happened. The family reached one final understanding. If life naturally created an opportunity for your paths to cross, they would welcome that moment instead of resisting it. They wouldn't rush events. They wouldn't interfere. They agreed to let authenticity reveal everything at the proper time. It was a simple decision. Yet it completely transformed the atmosphere. The invisible barriers that once existed had disappeared. In their place stood patience, curiosity, and hope. Stay until the very end of this journey, because sometimes the quietest choices create the strongest beginnings. If this story has stayed with you from the first chapter until now, I'd genuinely love to hear what part spoke to you the most. Share your thoughts in the comments. Your perspective may encourage someone else who is listening today. And if you enjoy stories filled with mystery, hope, and meaningful possibilities, subscribing simply means you'll be here for the next journey we explore together. Now listen closely. Your soulmate still doesn't know that this family conversation changed everything. But life has an extraordinary way of bringing hidden decisions into the light. Perhaps through an unexpected meeting. Perhaps through a simple conversation. Perhaps through a moment that feels completely ordinary until you look back and realize it changed everything. The greatest surprise was never that your soulmate's family talked about you. The greatest surprise was what they finally decided. They chose understanding over assumptions. They chose openness over hesitation. And above all, they chose to let the future reveal its own truth instead of trying to control it. That quiet choice became the beginning of a brand new chapter. One built not on fear, but on trust, patience, and possibility. So as this story comes to a close, remember this. Some of the most meaningful decisions are made in rooms you'll never enter, by people you'll never hear, long before their kindness reaches your life. You may never witness those conversations, but one day you'll notice their results. And when that day arrives, you'll understand that the greatest surprises often begin with silent conversations. And